The Me&Him podcast. Back again, episode 2 of Me&Him podcast. Hi, Dad. How are you?
Very well, thank you, son.
So Me&Him podcast are all about candid conversations between me and my dad about fatherhood, family, manhood, life, the metaverse, you name it. And so I'm me.
You're Jason, my son. And
if you didn't know that already.
I'm the ugly old one with the beard, his father.
That's my dad, Matt. All right, so it's Me&Him podcast, just clarifying who's who in the zoo here. So the reason we're doing this podcast is we have very interesting conversations, so it's nice to be able to capture something for posterity, but also not just to explore our own relationship dynamics, but also explore male relationships and stuff going on around us. I think that's fair, isn't it, Dad?
Yeah, it is. And I'm rather excited. For me, it's fairly recent, but it's been going on for, I guess, about 10 or 12 years now. Phenomenon of the men's sheds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think longer than that, to be honest, probably 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm out of touch, but it's so nice to see men getting together and working on joint projects, sometimes for their families, sometimes for charity groups, or people who've lost something in the floods or whatever.
Totally right.
And I've got a friend who lives in Haywood. His name is Bruce. And his men's shed actually has a couple of girls.
Oh, wow. There we go.
They're mature women.
Girls can be men too.
Who help out with the woodworking and everything else. So,
That's cool. I like that. But it's still the male
sheds
domain,
aren't
right?
exclusive.
Yeah.
I've
enough
got to
too.
get that right because...
Just like mothers groups aren't exclusive, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of temperamentality around these days whereby, just recently, the famous play Waiting for Godot, which involves 3 men, auditioned for the 3 men, and feminists and other groups have said that was judgmental because why were women auditioned for the role of 3 men? I mean, it just gets crazy sometimes, Dad, son. It really does.
You know what's funny? You bring up the men's shed. It's like, it's on topic, but it wasn't what I was planning to cover. But I've actually just been inquiring about something called the men's table, and it's another version of men's shed. And it's basically a dinner once a month that a group of men up to 12 get together. And there's none up here where I live, which I think is good to explain where we live to. So I'm in Port Macquarie, New South Wales, Australia. And Dad is in Caulfield South, Victoria, Australia. So we meet online to have this conversation. But I looked up, Dad, about these men's tables, and no, they're not doing one at Port Macquarie. So I've actually inquired to attend a sort of an entree event, they call it, keeping the dinner theme, with a mate of mine to maybe start a table up here. I just thought that'd be, bring some men together, good for community, good for conversations.
That's very constructive, son. I heartily endorse that. But just be prepared for, and I am not saying anything negative about women because I adore women, but there are some loonies out there who like to misconstrue everything for their own notoriety. And they cause trouble when some things like what you have just described to me are well-intentioned endeavours to have a constructive engagement amongst people who don't often have that opportunity.
Absolutely. So look, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Right now, I figured, a good way to get something going, have a few more conversations, and obviously get a few more listeners as well for the podcast. You never know. So I just by way of talking about where we're at and what's coming up next, you've got a big event coming up soon.
Well,
why don't you just tell me quickly about it, or share a little bit about it?
I've had a lifetime of excessive hospitality. I had the energy to do it once. I don't have it now. So I'm hiring a restaurant for my 80th birthday celebration. And I'm so pleased that my family is coming. And because my daughter has a very significant job, and right now, which is when I would have celebrated it because my birthday was last week.
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. She's attending an international conference in Kentucky, and I've deferred it by a month so that she and her family can come down and join you and your family and your brother and his lovely wife and we could all be together because at my age, this is the last big event. I can't see me having another one. And family is so goddamn important. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, well, kudos to you. We were there for your 70th, and that was your this will be the last one. Now it's the 80th.
No, I had one in between, which was my 75th Matt's used by a date party.
That's right. And then didn't you have the 64 Life Begins at...
that's when I turned 64. I suddenly realized it was in sync with one of the Beatles songs. So I had to...
That's right.
But, times have changed and so have I.
Yeah. And you're hiring a restaurant this time, which is great because, all the stuff involved in doing it in your place, there's a lot of work there. Now, with regard to this event, I believe it was 60 people coming around, including my sister and family coming over from all over Europe, basically. And I'm coming down from up north and a whole bunch of other friends and audiophile people.
I mean, right? There are friends of mine whom I've known since the 50s. And because hi-fi has been an important part of my life since the mid-70s.
That's high fidelity, sound.
Yes,
for those uninitiated.
But it like everything. No matter what club you join, there can be food clubs or hot rod clubs or motorcycle clubs or whatever. And by the way, there are far many motorcycle clubs that don't wear patches and go around doing naughty things.
What, they're coming too? Hells Angels?
Oh no, I've got a very good friend of mine from the audio environment who's motorcycled across the world. And he's a member of a motorcycle club, and they get together and have a really nice time.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm I'm off the booze right now in preparation, but it's going to be a fantastic time. Great to be able to celebrate with you. Great to be able to see you face to face and the whole family there too. It's going to be a fantastic event. So why don't we just get into it? The Me&Him podcast. I actually really enjoyed hearing a bit more about my great-granddad, I guess it was. What was his name, by the way? His first name?
The same as mine, but
was it?
Yeah. Mine is Matthew, and in Dalmatian it's Mate.
Mate. And you think I should know that, right? But
and what you probably don't know either is that I've got three names: Matthew, Joseph, Paul.
I think I know this.
Yeah. Matthew is my grandfather.
Yeah.
Joseph is my father, and Paul is his younger brother.
Yeah,
my uncle.
Well, I was quite taken with the story, particularly about Granddad at a very young age being kind of marooned on the wharf and being taken in by other Dalmatians. But I'd love to hear a bit more. Just focus a little bit more on the background there, and anything you want to share around, being brought up by an immigrant father, but also just the times as well. It was a different era back then.
Well, first, I just want to mention something. I did say in the previous broadcast that when World War I broke out, my granddad, and Dida is the name in Dalmatian for granddad.
Remember that.
Was in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. Well, I have here his wooden chest that he had his clothing and so forth in.
Oh, wow.
And
I think I've seen it, actually. I think you've shown it to me.
And it's in my will. I want the family to keep it, not because it is of such emotional importance to me. Both of my parents had to work. I was born in 1944 at the end of the war. And so there were no creches or places where you take your preschool children. So one of them, usually my mother, took the tram early and dropped me off with my grandparents where they lived.
Yep.
So I had enormous exposure to my grandparents from a very early age, and that's why I brought up my granddad's sea chest, which is for the people who are listening. It's like the old-fashioned treasure chests. It's exactly the same shape and so forth. Because I was fascinated by it as a pre-toddler. I used to pull myself up on it, and when I got bigger, I was actually allowed to look inside it, and I saw my granddad's passports, and the old passports, they put a stamp, a postage stamp from the country in the passport to signify your entry. It's now, of course, a rubber stamp or a...
No, they don't even do that anymore, actually.
Yeah, I know.
They scan it.
And the technology breaks down, and I've been in those long queues when it's broken down. I can tell you that.
Me too.
Yeah. So I became fascinated with its contents, and because I was growing up as an inquisitive child, and I spent so much time with my grandparents because my parents were working very hard, I used to ask my grandmother about how to do things. So by the age of 8, I could cook, sew, knit, iron, wash, and crochet.
Yeah, you're the perfect housewife.
As an 8-year-old. So you can imagine.
Wow, that doesn't happen anymore.
So you can imagine how that changed the tenor of my relationships with the good ladies, who I was with over 60 years. Because our jobs were interchangeable. Whoever was home did it. Whether it was the ironing or the cooking or so forth, we had very fluid relationships. Now, sorry, I've moved forward in time. I better go back to the past.
That's fine. No. But I think it's important because you're laying a foundation here. Because I think what I'm interested in for this podcast is, sharing stories that from both of our perspectives that maybe each of us didn't really know or didn't really consider previously. And obviously, there's a history element here too. And I'm sure anyone who's listening, who's going to listen to this down the line, also has that sort of background and trying to understand their parents and their grandparents. It's not an uncommon story as well about the changes and the hardships and how things have modernized and maybe we've got a little bit soft now. I don't know. So I don't think it's irrelevant.
Well, funnily enough, half of my hospitality skill set came from those formative years with my grandparents.
Okay.
I just learned how to do it. And
well, you definitely love cooking. I can vouch for that.
Yeah, I know. I've been cooking for, almost 75 years. And I know I've overdone it a lot. So sorry about that. But,
you just have to eat it all.
We lived in an apartment above a second-hand shop in the middle of Auckland City. And I'm a city boy, but in the late 40s and early 50s, the inner city was an ugly place. It didn't have the glamour and the, freewheeling entertainment opportunities that it has today.
I guess it was all about industry and,
it was rebuilding after the war.
Okay.
And those times were very austere. And, money was hard to come by. You had to really work your butt off. Both of my parents worked long hours. And, they both got home after 6 o'clock, which was quite late those days. And then had to start the preparation for a meal, etc. So that's why I spent such a long period of time with my grandparents, whom I loved. Right. But the apartment that we were in, the only access to it was from an alleyway behind a bakery on the corner of Hobson Street and Victoria Street. And it was a dangerous place because drunks and all sorts of weird people used to congregate in places like that, which are very close to all the major hotels, etc. And there was something like about 34 wooden steps from where we entered in a small area at the back, which served for my mother's washing line and old-fashioned boil everything up in a big concrete cylinder, which you had to fire up with timber and so forth, and wash house. And the only toilet was an outhouse at the bottom, outside the bottom of those 34 steps.
Oh, that sucks when you're busted.
And once as a baby, when I was crawling, and my parents told me this, I actually crawled over the top and fell down. But it turns out the instinctive response of a small child is to group itself in the fetal position. And that saved me from being maimed for life.
Wow.
I mean, they couldn't believe it when they got to the bottom. And of course, I was howling, as pre-toddlers do.
That was first of your 9 lives, I think. First of your 38. I don't know how many lives you had.
No, let's settle for 90.
90
lives. Because
Okay.
I'm sure I've blitzed about 75 so far.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no, at that stage, until my father, through his contractor friends, put it in, there was no hot water, there was no lighting, and there was just one gas stove to cook on, and that was it. And we all, my dad, my mum, and me, separately, of course, we all bathed in a tin bath, the one which was on the floor. Mm-hmm. And my mother had to, of course, boil many, many kettles full of water to fill it.
I don't think people really understand. I mean, really, in the terms of history, it's a blink of the eye ago, right? It's just, of course, not that long ago where you've got, encroaching darkness, you've got cold, you've got fires running in the house, you've got, as you say, you're boiling up clothes to try and wash them, nothing to switch on.
Oh, and by the way, that little one gas stove, that heated the place as well.
Yeah, I had a feeling, right. And, and that comes to explain the attitude, I guess, of Granddad, as I knew him, being so house proud and so proud of his yard and proud of his, all the things he had collected, his car, because he had to fight for everything. And you, from what you've just explained, there was little, if not nothing, that didn't have to be created from scratch.
Oh, by the way,
nothing was given.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, son. All of the improvements he did to the apartment upstairs, he did with my parents' own money, but he was helped through his contractor friends. The landlord did not provide any compensation.
Just a roof over your head, basically, by the sounds of things.
But he did increase the rents.
Because the property was now renovated.
Yes.
Renovated.
Would you believe it?
Now with hot water. How exciting. Well, that's really interesting I can actually picture that. And you've told me little bits and pieces of this before, but I think this is a really good journey for us to take to understand not just the austerity, but just the change through the generations as well. And we can obviously reflect on those through as we continue these discussions. I think that's perfect. I want to flip it and just reflect a little bit about my early years.
Absolutely.
Cool with that?
I mean, look, you will be giving me new information, and I'm really interested to hear it.
Yeah. All right. Well,
whether I like it or not.
Buckle yourself in. Here we go. The Me&Him podcast.
Son, we've been talking a lot about me so far, and I feel as if I'm hogging the limelight. It's obviously difficult. You can't recall your memories of when you were 3.5, but how was it for you in those early days? And tell me something about your experiences.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Thank you for asking. I don't remember a lot like many of us pre 5 years old. I do have a couple of recollections of Avondale where we lived with mum and my brother and sister. And again, very sporadic sort of thoughts. Where I really can remember with some level of clarity is when we lived in Grattan Place. Now, Grattan Place is in an area called Freeman's Bay, which was a newly developed suburb, which apparently was formerly slums, which you have got a bit of history around, I think, as well.
I went to school in Napier Street School in Freeman's Bay,
crazy,
which was the slum school of Auckland decades beforehand.
Yeah, isn't that funny? So we ended up back there when Mum moved from Avondale closer to the city, and I started. It was then called Freeman's Bay Primary, I think. It had changed its name.
Sorry for the interruption, son.
No, that's fine.
But the whole area had become gentrified over the passage of about 20 or 30 years. So it was a smart place to live, and the slum school that I had gone to, which was the same set of buildings that you went to, had been gentrified too to suit the development of the area.
That's right. And we lived in some really nifty looking townhouses that were built with common grounds at the back of them with nice foliage and what have you. So it was actually a good, decent place to live. However, I will point out that the slums hadn't disappeared. They were just around the periphery of that area, Grey Lynn, etc. So whilst we had, we were in a nice little pocket there, the area was still a little bit downtrodden. Now, with regard to my memories, though, I remember my first day of school sitting on the floor at the assembly at Grattan Street, at Premiers Bay Primary, and really being completely lost. And when I looked around, I hadn't been exposed in a large way to the outside world, I guess, at that age. This was the first time, 5 years old, you're thrown into the fray. And
another interruption.
Mm-hmm.
At some other point, maybe not even in this particular podcast, let's come back to how you felt your first day at school, because I clearly remember round about your age, my first day, and I'm interrupting you, so please, I'll shut up and let you carry on. But some other stage, let's do that.
So my mum told me this actually when I came back from my first day, and she goes, "How was your first day at school, darling?" And I said, "Oh, it was pretty good, but Mum, they're all Indians." And she, I think, surmised that I'd never really had a lot to do with Polynesian kids before, so I must have just thought they were all Indians. And it was the first time, I guess, that I started to understand that the area I was living was very heavily Polynesian concentrated. And a lot of the families were kind of fresh off from the islands, and that they'd come to settle in a cheaper area. And this is probably where the sort of lower socioeconomic areas still existed outside of the fringe of Fremens Bay. And hence begun my foray into, I guess I would call it, the survival of primary school. And the reason I frame it like that is those years, I think we can't underestimate how indelible the memories and the emotions and the experiences are from those years. And
agree.
Whilst I don't remember a lot between 0 and 5, from 5 to 10, I remember a hell of a lot. And I remember being scared a vast proportion of my childhood. And I say this not as any guilt trip or anything like that. I just remember I had a single mum who was struggling to work and cope with 3 kids, and I couldn't be everywhere all at once. And I pretty much was in a school where the language, the common language of the majority of the students and population there was violence. It was, I'll smash your face in, bro, was the call of the day. So if you did not either do what someone wanted or fall in with the right crowd or, stand out in whatever way, you were ruthlessly not just bullied, but often just pummeled and at a first port of call before conversation. So I was intimidated by this, and I didn't really have, anyone to call on. And this is obviously relates to the development of malehood and fathering and this degree, having son, an absent father.
I didn't know what you've just told me, because my experience 30 years before you was identical.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see if this...
I thought everything had improved with Freeman's Bay.
No, it was 80% Polynesian Maori, which is fine, no problem with that. But there was a cohort of that group that were new arrivals whose parents were very, very violent with them, and they took that to school with them. And so, from my perspective, being a kind of a sheltered white kid, I was the minority. I was also the weaker species, and I had to find a way to survive. And the way that I went about this was I had to bring in a bodyguard. And so I seconded a kid. I used to call him I felt like he was a man back in those days because he was so much bigger than me, but a guy named Langi, who was Samoan. And he was kind of cool guy, kind of funny and everything. But he and I became mates. But I think the reason that we were mates was I would give him half my lunch every day because he didn't have lunch to bring to school. And whenever I bought anything cool that I liked, like a new toy I got for Christmas, I remember one time bringing in a microscope, which I was super, enamored with. And I made the mistake of bringing that to school, and then Lungy wanted to have a look at it, and I'm like, oh, here we go. And of course, Lungy stole it and never gave it back to me. In those days, I guess he was saying, hey, just lend it to your friend. But everything I lent to my friend/bodyguard never came back to me. So I had Lungy in my corner, and the only reason I needed Lungy in my corner was because, and you wouldn't believe this, you'd write a script about this. There was another little white kid, even smaller than me, named Winky Schmidt. Right now, Winky Schmidt. Right now, I will never forget this name. Never forget it. Winky Schmidt's father was German, and Winky Schmidt would come to school in a flak jacket with Nazi insignia on it.
Wow.
I know. I accepted
in the 70s.
I accepted it as normal back then because I didn't know any difference. And I think back to it now going, are you kidding me? His dad might have been ex-SS. I don't know. So anyway, Winky was an evil little mofo. I tell you, he was after me maybe because I don't know, had a mother around, or I don't know, but he was gunning for me the whole time. And so he had got enlisted his own bodyguard called Keffy, and Keffy was a Niuean dude who was big.
From my experience in the old days, it was the Niueans who used to carry the knives.
This guy was scary. So I had Lungy, he had Keffy, and this just like robot wars or something. When we got to a point or a precipice when there was going to be a major argument or a combative situation, we'd sent in our bodyguards to fight each other. Can you believe it? I can't hardly believe it telling you. And so
the
Lungy
wide world of wrestling.
I mean, I'm not. There was survival in that point, and these obviously Winky must have been giving Keffy some of this pocket money or something as well because they were going to bat on our behalf. And so right through, probably up until I left there for intermediate school at maybe 12 years old, I had to work out a way to navigate this hostile terrain. And Lungy, I actually count him as a friend at the time because he paved the way for me to be able to exist and feel some degree of safety at school. Winky was just, I don't know what's become of him, but he wasn't, he was a pretty messed up little kid. And obviously didn't like me for whatever reason. Maybe I was a little brat too, but I don't remember doing anything to him. He just sort of decided I was persona non grata and wanted to see my downfall. So that was my sort of early childhood years. And the one thing I will say, as all this was shaping up, was that I yearned to have someone to stand up for me and protect me. I had to pay someone with my lunch money to do that because there wasn't a dad to come in and put someone in their place, or at least, even going to school and playing soccer or sport or allowing me to show up in teams. So I kind of just had to find my way through from a sort of a broken marriage, in my environment through to a hostile school environment. And I just had to find a way to cut a path. And I did, but I didn't realize until much, much later how much fear I was left with from that experience. And it carried through for at least 2 decades after finishing school, until I wondered why I was carrying this almost terror that I buried, and I thought I was acting normally. I'd play the role, but inside it was like a coiled spring.
Thank you for sharing that with me, because I have never ever known it until this point.
Wow. Okay.
And somewhere along the line in our series of conversations, I want you to bring up Napier Street School, because I had a set of experiences decades before, which so close to what you're describing, it's unbelievable.
Wow. Well, I mean, history repeats, right? Unfortunately.
Oh yeah, sadly.
I mean, there's another cheerier segue into split ends, and
Yes.
history never repeats. I tell myself before I go to sleep. So there's a little bit of a snapshot, I guess, and what I'd love to do in future episodes is, and definitely I'll ask you that question, Dad. But unpack not just what happened, but just also how it showed up, how it truncated some of the life that we could have lived and the talents we could have pursued and the self-assuredness that we could have, experienced because of this dysfunctional / dangerous.
Well, I mean,
younger years.
if we want to get glib, we could call it a formative trauma.
Formative trauma, yeah. It's that's pretty much what it is, and I don't think we're alone in that. We've talked.
I'm sure we're not, because bullying exists in just about every school. It takes different forms.
You're right. It's a bit more subtle now than the big Islander guy wanted to smash your face in, right? Like, I mean, that might happen, but it's now quite insidious and built into every time you pick up the phone.
Yeah, and I sometimes wonder, and I've never had any experience of this. I've had your experiences, but I've never been sent to a boarding school by well-to-do parents. I sometimes wonder what psychological damage that environment can cause.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, as we progress, I would love to hear from listeners and just and hear what people have gone through with their own take on that. I mean, on one hand, I think, hey, boarding school, I might have been safer, but hey, I couldn't even gone home then. Like I would be at the mercy of whoever the strongest, toughest, meanest person was in that environment, which probably would have been worse. I would want to move on because I want to touch on one of your emails in the next segment. So let's try that out. Emails from Dad. So this is called Emails from Dad. So what you may not know, what you definitely don't know, is that my dad likes to send a lot of emails, and there's lots of what he calls mat crap mixed in there. Can be poetry, can be a funny video, can be just a download, a mind dump of various things, a quote of the day, you name it. Sometimes I read them in full. Sometimes I quickly check them and go, that's too much for me right now. And other times I will respond and we'll have a dialogue around them. So I've gone through the annals, and I've pulled out one that is not, it's actually fairly recent, called Continuous Creation. It was headed as, and it seems it's a nice little poem, because you're a bit of a poet and you do know it. I think it would be nice to not only have you speak to how you came up with this poem, but also read the poem, because it's nice and short, not like the one I did last. I've learned my lesson from last episode. It took me like an hour and a half. I was like, I was exhausted.
So it serves you right. You didn't ask my permission.
We live and we learn, right? So
bad son.
A nice 3-stanza poem. I think I could handle that. So yeah. So tell us a little bit about this inspiration you got on the way back from Balaclava.
Well, the reason why I called the email Continuous Creation is that I write a lot, but I'm not disciplined, which is a shame. I've probably got multiple degrees in procrastination, but most of what I write just comes to me. I could be mowing the lawns or, doing something really mundane, and I've got to write this stuff down. And I happen to be driving back from the restaurant where I'm having my 80th birthday celebration, and I took a shortcut, so it was through streets that I wasn't familiar with, but I've got a very good sense of compass direction in my head. So I knew that I was traveling in the right way. And as I turned a corner, I saw a street name called McHenry. And I thought, gee, that's odd. I've never seen a street named McHenry before. And I continued driving. And while I was driving, this piece of doggerel came into my head.
Sorry, what did you call that?
A doggerel. It's an old term for nonsense.
Doggerel. Okay, I learned something today. All right.
Yeah, no, Google it. You'll find it exists.
All right.
Anyway, so that's the background, and it just sort of came into my head, and I made a point of trying to remember it on the drive back home, and I did, and I wrote it down.
Cool.
So
let's hear it.
This is your weird dad, Caleb McHenry, a soldier on the land, till he lay down his rifle and ran his fingers through the sand. It spoke to him of memories and seasons still to come, and how men like fruit can ripen when they turn towards the sun.
Okay, so I read that twice. And the first time I read it, I thought, oh, this sounds like a little bit of a war poem. And then when I reread it, I got stuck on that last stanza, I think we call it, or last piece of prose. And the ripen towards the sun, I just, in my mind, flashed to like the carnage of one of the world wars and men just rotting. I don't know if that's where you were going with that.
Actually, son, it's been grandiose to call it a work of art, which it isn't. It's just a scribble from me. But if we want to look at, just to get the metaphor right, pictures hanging in an art gallery, people from different walks of life or different stages, 10-year-olds versus 30-year-olds versus 70-year-olds, they'll have a different response to exactly the same display.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your response I find really interesting.
Right. So I got it wrong?
No. There's no right and wrong side.
Okay.
With this kind of stuff, we're all individuals and we all map the world in completely different, unique ways.
True.
That's how we built. I'm proud of those last 4 lines, by the way, and how men like fruit can ripen when they turn towards the sun. I didn't think about this. This damn thing just came. But when I stopped to think about it, I thought I saw it as linking back to the soldier who put down his arms and suddenly stopped tramping across the earth, but suddenly got in touch with it.
Oh, wow.
And everything that the earth gives us.
And ripen as in a coming of age sort of thing?
Yeah. And so then I saw him mentally as becoming a farmer.
Oh, wow.
As someone who knew that the earth nurtured everything, including humanity, but that's a much broader metaphor to deal with. And if the sun is shining from the right direction, the fruits that are hanging down, whether they be mangoes or anything else, will ripen to the best of their ability because they've got the most nurturing environment.
Wow, I've just seen this a completely different way now.
And that's how it felt to me. But I don't believe those 4 lines came out of me because even I look at them and think, holy shit.
Yeah, that's pretty tight in terms of what it conveys. And I just find, just building on what you've just explained there, I feel like there is this element of when you plant a seed and you give it the right sunlight and water and soil conditions, it will thrive. It will grow to its fullest extent of being whatever the plant is. And if you,
we're all seeds, son.
Yes. And if you don't have all the right mixture of elements, the right amount of sun, what have you,
correct,
you won't grow to your full potential. And so men can ripen as they turn towards the sun. I feel like I'm turning towards the sun right now. And maybe ripening in that respect is a wonderful thing.
No, hang on. You're the son, I'm the father.
Yeah.
Let's not
maybe you're ripening
as
you're looking at me.
No, I'm sorry. I can't help but play with the language. I love it so much.
Well, I really like that poem, and I do think it's important when the urge to create or the spontaneous thoughts come through to honor them by expressing them, which is why I create melodies and write songs and stuff. I just honor what I need to do because I understand it's all about the flow through now. It's not about what am I going to do with this, how I'm going to produce it, or, who am I going to show it to? I just need to do it because the creativity is part of my connection to something far deeper than just myself.
What you're really saying...
Okay. So please clarify.
And I'm over-explaining this. We men tend to be driven by logic most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got intuition, but we don't give it the rightful place that it deserves. But when we are in an intuitive mode, we don't know what we're capable of until it comes out.
Yeah, and you got to be open and allow it to flow forth without getting your rational mind involved, I guess.
Well, to minimize your rational mind,
you still got to write it down.
Or irrational, as the case may be.
Well, I liked it. Well done. I'm going to choose from now on. I've decided, making an executive decision here on the Me&Him podcast. that I'm going to choose a quote of the day, which is nice and short, or a short poem, or something that's punchy.
You're really going to embarrass the hell out of me, aren't you?
No, because there's so much there. Like there's hundreds of things. I saved a whole bunch of them. So we got plenty of stock here. We could do another 100 episodes. We have to live to your 100. That's all. You need another few lives to buy a few more lives from somewhere. Cool. Well, I like that. As I say, popular segment. Let us know when we finally release this podcast if you do like it. You want more.
Look, I was fascinated to hear your interpretation or what you got from those 4 lines because it was completely different to mine, but it was unique to you.
Yeah.
And you gave me new information.
Well, it's good if men ripen when they turn towards the sun on the battlefield. It's good. It's good. It's good fertilizer anyway, right? So it's all about the cycle of life. Oh, that's a bad one.
Let's not dig too far.
No. Sorry, I'll cut it there. The Me&Him podcast.
I was amazed at our different reactions to the last 4 lines of that short poem that I wrote. Again, very informative and educational.
Yeah, and I think that's what this is all about. It's about sharing some ideas, sharing some creative expression, sharing different takes on that way we see things, and obviously my larger agenda here, outside of obviously doing this with you, is to affect some sort of positive change with other men, fathers, sons who are listening and thinking about their own lives, their own relationships, their history, and maybe what they've had to work through and where they've come. I really feel like for me now, the next step is to be more of service to others than I've been, for the first part of my life, and I'm hoping that together we can make that small dent in the universe. But in terms of what I got out of today's discussion, I think just you explaining and putting detail to the living arrangements from grandma and granddad, and just the actual struggle of just the basic needs of survival, and just where we are today, and just how lucky and how you're grateful, really, all of us should be, just to have a heater to turn on or a washing machine to go while you're running out the door to run some errands. It's been such a small period of time in the scheme of things, but there's been such massive improvements in our quality of life, and I just don't want to ever take that for granted.
Fair enough.
Any final words of wisdom, Dad?
We older people are meant to be fonts of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
You proclaim to be, that's for sure.
No, I don't. I'm still a learner. I'm still that kid in the primers, 3, 4, 5 years old. Yes, I've learned a lot more than you have because of my age, and much of it has been negative, I must say. But I'm continually looking forward, and the joy of my grandchildren, who are now young adults, the energy that they bring and the ideas, it's wonderful. 2 of my grandchildren took me out as their shout for my birthday, and they didn't have to do this, to a jazz club last night. And it was in a kind of a cellar in the CBD, which had been a venue of that kind for about 30 years. And it turned out that it wasn't actually jazz. The artists who were performing were doing B.B. King and Etta James.
And more soul, eh?
It was a stunning evening, and I was there with my 2 grandchildren. It was just amazing.
So your words of wisdom are keep learning, stay curious, be open to new experiences.
Live life to the full, in the sense that a child does, where everything is new and everything is exciting.
I think that's a nice way to wrap it up. Been nice chatting.
Okay.
Catch you next time around.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Me&Him podcast.